is Jane Robbins. I work at the English Language Centre of Hong Kong Polytechnic University, and I'm going to talk to you about using digital stories as an alternative to the traditional student presentation for assessing speaking. In 2012, Hong Kong's universities began teaching a new curriculum. Students now study at university for 4 years, having spent 6 years at secondary school, so they come to us a year earlier than previously. At PolyU, the new curriculum has been expanded to include a compulsory general university requirement, which consists of broad liberal studies and languages, English and Mandarin. As part of the new English language provision, the ELC decided to stream students according to their Diploma of Secondary Education English scores. Students coming with only the minimum entry requirement for university are required to take Practical English for University Studies, which is a general proficiency course, and it focuses on accuracy in order to prepare students for the academic English courses that all students take. Since the DSE was a new exam, as students were a year younger than previously, there was a lot of uncertainty about what to expect to this cohort before they arrived. In addition, at our ELC, we'd not previously taught general proficiency courses. In the old curriculum, we'd focused on English for academic purposes and English for specific purposes based on the particular needs of each department. Now the courses students had done at school, of course, were general English, so we didn't want to duplicate what they'd done before. This is university, they're expecting something new. So we decided, therefore, we had some freedom in this course to try things that we didn't really have space for in a more formal academic curriculum. And after several trial versions, we decided to make the speaking assessment a digital story. We wanted to avoid presentations, as throughout their university careers, Hong Kong students have to make a lot of presentations. We did want them to be formally assessed on their spoken language, but we wanted to avoid turning into a logistically complicated assessment, which used up a lot of the limited class time, and to avoid it becoming a burden for teachers. The solution we came to was digital stories. Students could present their research using software which comes installed on their computers already, and our feeling was they're Generation Y, they're digital natives, they'll love it. So what is a digital story? Digital storytelling involves combining narrative with images and sounds to create short movies. It was pioneered in the 1990s by the Center for Digital Storytelling, a non-profit community arts organization in Berkeley, California. It was a collaboration of media artists and designers who got together to explore how digital media tools could be used to empower lay practitioners to produce creative art. The aim was to make art accessible to everyone, not just the professionals. The digital stories are very concise and have been described by Daniel Meadows as multimedia sonnets from the people. In its simplest form, a digital story can be a simple photo slideshow with a commentary. However, using Photo Story 3, Movie Maker, or iMovie, after a very short time spent exploring the software, our students begin to produce interesting and innovative 6-minute movies that include video clips, music, sound effects, and captions. Using this format, they are able to produce presentations which entertain as well as inform, something that unfortunately cannot often be said of the average student presentation. Certainly for a teacher, marking becomes a lot more interesting. For their digital story project, our students carry out research on heritage conservation in Hong Kong and focus on one particular heritage property which they choose. Heritage conservation has only become a public issue in Hong Kong in the last 15 years or so. Before that, it was accepted that old buildings should be knocked down to build bigger, newer, shinier ones. And of course, Hong Kong is a city renowned for its modern skyscrapers. Even now, while people generally think significant buildings should be preserved, the feeling is that it can only be enforced for public buildings. There is a strong feeling, which our students tend to share, that the government shouldn't tell a private property owner what to do with their land. And generally students are horrified when I tell them about the British system of listed buildings, with regulations on private owners determining what renovations or what improvements they can make. Surprisingly, in this modern city, there is still a government list of over 1,400 properties in Hong Kong which are deemed to be heritage sites. They range from famous landmarks like the Peninsula Hotel and Wong Tai Sim Temple to lesser known sites such as the Sai Ying Pung Community Complex, which is said to be haunted, having been used at different times as a wartime execution hall and a mental asylum. Students are required not simply to tell the history of the property, but to critique some aspect of it or its restoration. This may be to make a case for its inclusion in the list of heritage properties, or to analyse the success of a restoration project, or even to critique government policy towards heritage in general. Largely at the request of teachers, we are currently broadening the scope of the term heritage property to include aspects of intangible heritage associated with the property. Although the list of possible heritage properties is large, students tend to choose the same ones each time. And while some find innovative ways to present them, for example, one student showed clips of an interview with a resident in a building due to be restored, many become fairly repetitive. We don't have the resources to completely rewrite the materials to focus on intangible heritage, but one student gave us the idea for a way forward in diversifying the topics while retaining the teaching materials related to buildings. She wanted to focus on telling the story of IIs, illegal immigrants, who entered Hong Kong illegally from China in the 1950s and became an integral part of Hong Kong's economic boom. For her personally, it was the story of her parents and their friends, but the story is also part of Hong Kong's collective memory. We felt that it was important to tie the story to a building, so that she was not disadvantaged by being unable to use the vocabulary and practice tasks in the teaching materials. The only building in the story was a fairly unremarkable concrete structure in a remote border area, used by many IIs for shelter when they first crossed into Hong Kong. So she used that as a starting point, even though the building itself can by no means be regarded as a heritage property. From this example, we've broadened the scope of the assessment, and from next semester, students will be able to look at any aspect of cultural heritage by tying it to a building. An obvious example is looking at a traditional festival rather than the temple it is held in, but we're looking forward to the more personal stories that may spring from this development. In addition to the usual internet and document searches carried out to research a university project, students also conduct site visits to their heritage property, take photographs, and search for images and music. This allows us to discuss copyright issues beyond academic integrity, which is what we usually address in university courses. For students everywhere, but in China in particular, this is an issue that may not be addressed elsewhere. As a result, the course includes an exploration of Creative Commons licenses, which allow authors, artists, photographers, and musicians to easily mark their creative work so that it can be shared legally by others. As we were preparing the course, we also approached the Hong Kong Public Records Office, and we have their permission to use any images in their archive. But for more recent images, particularly of restoration projects, students have to choose the images very carefully to avoid copyright infringements. Many of the well-known restored buildings are in private hands, and the image that students want to use are copyrighted in the brochure or on the website. So if they cannot find Creative Commons images, it is often easier for them to use their own photographs. When they come to put the digital story together, students value the fact that they can relax and record their narration over and over until they're happy with it. After all, this is an English assessment, so the narration is the most important part. By far the largest proportion of their grade comes from language and pronunciation. Some students stick with the images and narration and perform very well, but most get caught up in the new presentation media and add music and effects to produce a digital story that goes beyond a simple presentation. So how do our students feel about the digital story assessment? We were surprised that our Generation Y students turned out not to be the digital natives we were expecting. While the software is very simple to use, and for example I could teach someone to create a 2 to 3 image story in 10 minutes or so, students complain every semester about this assessment. The main complaint is not that it's difficult, but that it requires them to learn a new skill that they don't perceive as being directly relevant to the course, English. We have structured the unit in the teaching materials so that they are learning vocabulary, grammar and language skills similar to how they do in the other units in the course. However, the texts we use are instructions for using the software. The discussions we have relate to copyright and Creative Commons. We give them time in the language laboratory to collaborate and critique each other's stories. However, the dread of the unknown means that they see these not as language tasks, but as information technology tasks, and they complain that they are learning IT, not English. Once they have mastered the digital story, most students are happy with what they produce, and they can appreciate the skill that they've developed. But in the initial stages, it does require the teacher to sell the digital story to students in a way that we were certainly not expecting. We have seen that some teachers generate a lot fewer complaints than others, and it seems very often that it's those teachers who are more confident with the media themselves. They seem to be able to sell the concept from the start, and their students react more positively. Conversely, we were expecting to have a difficult job persuading some members of the teaching staff of the value of digital stories. For those not comfortable with digital media, it is a big change in assessment style. However, our experience has been that while it is initially daunting for these teachers, and they have perhaps needed more support in the initial stages than other teachers, they have really enjoyed teaching their students and learning with them. One very experienced teacher asked me to guide him through preparing even each week's lesson plan, as he had so little confidence in his ability to teach digital stories. But by halfway through the course, he was making great suggestions of new activities that helped his students. And by the end of the course, he was telling everyone how much he liked it and how much he got out of teaching it. Partly, I think he was proud of what he'd learnt, and partly, as I said at the beginning, the course allows a space in the curriculum for something different to our normal teaching. And despite his apprehension, he appreciated the chance to try something completely new in the classroom. So would I recommend using digital stories instead of the ubiquitous presentation? Yes, definitely. To be successful, it does require the course leaders and then the teachers to become skilled salespeople at the start. But by the end of the project, most students have a sense of achievement that I think is deeper than they do at the end of a normal presentation. I myself have primary age children who produce digital stories regularly as part of their courses. I show their stories to my students as part of my sales pitch and tell them the technology is easy enough for an 8-year-old. What is different is the level of research that they are going to do, and that is what distinguishes their digital stories from an 8-year-old's. And that research would be the same however I ask them to present it, in an essay, in a traditional presentation, or in a digital story. I do think though, by the time Generation Z comes to us at university, we will be dealing with the true digital natives, and the scope of what they can achieve will be something completely different again. Now, if you would like to see a sample digital story produced by one of our students, please continue to part 2 of the presentation to watch Alex Feng Xu Feng's story about Central Market. It's also available at his YouTube channel, which is there. Thank you.